All right. I'm David Solomonoff, president of the New York chapter of the Internet Society, and we're here today at the New York Hub, sponsored by the Internet Society of New York, remote hub for the Internet Governance Conference, the IGF-USA, Internet Governance Forum USA, which is organized by the DC chapter. And we're having a breakout session here on the topic of Bitcoin, blockchain, and beyond. So we're going to be discussing Bitcoin and blockchain-related technologies in the context of internet governance, and we'll also be, as a logical precursor to that, discussing a little bit the current state in terms of regulation, law enforcement, and general adoption of both Bitcoin and blockchain technologies. So I'm going to start out by asking some very broad questions. This is not an area that I'm tremendously knowledgeable about, and some of our other viewers and people who see this later may not be as well. So we want to get a little bit of a general handle on the degree, basically the degree to which these technologies are currently adopted, and then we'll go into their implications and appropriate policy, regulatory, and technical responses to those, directions and implications. So what I'd first like to do is ask what might seem like a banal question, but and I'll ask it in two parts. We'll go back and forth. To what extent do you see, starting with Bitcoin and more broadly the blockchain technology in terms of other digital currencies, smart contracts, and other things, what is the adoption level now, and where is that going? Is Bitcoin, for example, something that will flame out or give way to newer related technologies, or will it, in its current rather imperfect form, become the actual standard for digital currencies? That's the first question. And we'll go to Jinyoung first.
Okay. If you hear feedback, it may be from my end. So okay. I apologize for that. Let me know if it gets too much.
Well, we're good right now. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so to begin, you're right to call Bitcoin as it is in its imperfect form, right?
Yeah, right.
Because everyone acknowledges it's a new technology and it takes time for new technologies to mature as you get relevant and experienced people in the industry, but also the money to be able to build it out. I think people are also starting to become more aware that Bitcoin in and of itself is not just an application for money, right? There's an entire sector of the industry that is looking at Bitcoin 2.0 type projects. There are even some in the industry that are not excited about Bitcoin as money per se, but as for the blockchain technology and what that enables in terms of a distributed ledger. So Bitcoin is, I kind of compare Bitcoin as like as a toddler in its terrible twos, right? Okay. It's stumbling a lot. It's struggling to, it has a lot of personalities and it's struggling to find what its true identity is. And there are a lot of people trying to kind of influence and provide input on which personality should emerge, right?
Okay. All right, let's go over to Paul Vigna, who is with the Wall Street Journal, and get your take, Paul.
Yeah, I think there are probably two things to keep in mind when you're talking about Bitcoin specifically, and it probably applies to the blockchain, but just talking about Bitcoin specifically, okay. And Jinyoung, you kind of hit on them. One is that this is a very new currency. This is a very new technology. It's only, it's not even 7 years old yet. It's not even in terms of the software itself, it's not even at version 1.0 yet. This is still something that is being built out. So you have to keep in mind that this is it's very interesting. It's basically a live experiment that is happening in the public realm in front of everybody. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing I think is around 2012, 2013, certainly 2013, when Bitcoin really started to kind of filter into the public sphere, a lot of people thought that this was going to happen very quickly, and this was going to take over very quickly, and Bitcoin was going to become gigantic and huge overnight. And there was a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of hype over that, and it didn't happen. The rates of adoption, especially when you the rates of adoption themselves may look pretty good if you can say, oh, we're doing, X times what we were doing a year ago or 2 years ago. But when you compare it to the number of people in the world using Bitcoin, the amount of money compared to all the money in the world that's being invested, it's still very small. So this is still a very, very small world. You have to keep that in mind. It's a very small world, and it's a very early world. Those things said, I do believe that it has a tremendous amount of potential. I do believe that the technology itself is really, in a lot of ways, quite elegant. And I think you are going to see a lot of people realizing there are a lot of different ways to apply it. Currency kind of now looks like that was really just the first use case. And you're going to see people start experimenting. Well, it works for currency. What else can we use it for? So this is really something that I think people thought this might be a 6 month and 8 month, a year process. This is going to be a 5, 10, 20-year process.
Okay, now here's where we're going to get interesting. Jinyoung, you do a lot of work in terms of consulting with law enforcement and so forth, so I think you'll find this particularly, your area of competence. Initially, the Bitcoin developers had a strong libertarian focus, so they wanted to basically create something that would supplant the currencies that are created by nation states. And they saw that, and there's still certainly people moving in this direction, saw that as a step towards creating something that was independent of traditional nation states in cyberspace. So, and now, of course, as with many things, the sort of digital utopianism is faded a little bit, and there's somewhat more of a realistic expectation here, but I'm getting to the question, bear with me. It's two parts. One, and this would be your area, to what extent has the underground economy, the global underground economy, and criminal enterprises taken up Bitcoin and the blockchain technology? And Paul, we can follow with you in your take on this as well. And realistically, to what extent do you think that Bitcoin and related blockchain technologies will remain outside of the control of traditional nation states, law enforcement, and intergovernmental, law enforcement and related kinds of institutions?
Those are all very good thoughts, David, and I can tell you did your homework.
Some of it.
Well, so let's kind of rewind and start back with, the ideology, right?
Yes.
A lot of libertarians are excited about Bitcoin and what Bitcoin can offer. And Satoshi in his white paper even referenced some of that ideology, right? But the idea of, say specifically as an example, Bitcoin usurping like nation states and fiat currencies, we think about, even from TV and movies, they were supposed to replace place, right? They were supposed to replace these different forms of entertainment. And even today, we have digital wallets, we have credit cards. My dad refuses to use a credit card. He still writes checks, and they're slowly becoming extinct with his generation, right? And so this idea that maybe Bitcoin specifically could become a global currency, time will tell, right? But I think also part of that libertarian ideology is that people have the choice. If they want to use a digital currency like Bitcoin, they can. But if they want to use a different medium, then the ideology would support that choice, that freedom of choice. When it comes to criminal enterprises using Bitcoin, Patrick Merck, who was the executive director and the former general counsel of the Bitcoin Foundation, he used to tell people, you have to be a pretty dumb criminal to use Bitcoin, because it really speaks to the person not understanding the transparent nature of the technology. And what I'm finding with some of the conversations that we're having is that people are intelligent, and they realize, if you're gonna introduce a new method of payment like digital currencies, it does require you to become trained and educated. It doesn't make it less hard to find criminals if you can be trained in it and if you can understand how to use the technology for good and how to kind of connect the dots to connect the crime to the criminal, much like criminals using cell phones or automobiles or plane tickets or credit cards, then there's a high likelihood that you'll be able to catch bad actors. In terms of Bitcoin remaining, decentralized, where nation states and governments won't have control over. I mean, no one owns Bitcoin, right? So no one can have control over it. But can governments adopt the technology and kind of create their own sidechain, right? There's alternative currencies being made all the time. There's maybe thousands at this point. I don't know. Paul would know because for his book, which is also a great book,
Thank you.
it is, I believe, the best book on Bitcoin out in the market today. They had to do tons of research on all these different currencies. A government could decide, and I know Canada has looked into creating something called GovCoin, right? But that means that it doesn't mean that they would have control over the version that Satoshi created. They would just have control over the version that they created, right? And in a situation like that, yes, Bitcoin, the version that Satoshi created and the one that the entire open source community is contributing to would remain out of government controls. But at the same time, if you want to interact with the real world, right, the 99% of the world that currently does not understand Bitcoin and blockchain, government may want to serve as that bridge to provide consumer protection and to provide some sort of standard so that if you are involved in an exchange such as Mt. Gox as an example, that you as a consumer would have some sort of some level of safety and soundness and certainty that someone's not going to run off with their money.
Okay, I'm going to throw it over to Paul.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I agree with everything that Jinyoung said, especially the part about the book. But no, I do agree with what you said. I think it's, again, things that you should keep in mind when you're talking about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies is this is open source software. So anybody can take it and make a copy of it and come up with their own coin. And I think, Jinyoung, the last time I looked, it was up to about 600. You have 600 or what they call these altcoins. 590 of them, I would say, have no chance at ever going anywhere. Some of them are probably just really poorly thought out pump and dump schemes, but some of them have a certain market cap, certain followers. Ripple is one that has gotten some traction. Ethereum is one that hasn't launched yet, but people are very, very excited about it. So the idea that you could have a government come in and design their own Fed coin, it's not unthinkable, and they could do it. And I personally, I think that eventually they will do it. What I think you'll probably have in again, 5, 10, 20 years is you'll probably have a world where you have myriad digital currencies. Bitcoin will be one of them, and it will be one that is not controlled by anybody, one that is outside the purview of governments, and people can use it for whatever they want. They can use it for good, they can use it for ill. It will be out there. You'll probably have some other government coins. You'll probably have maybe even some, you might have a consortium of Wall Street banks or some group of banks or some group of retailers or somebody who wants to come up with their own payment system that they'll use this. I think you're going to see a lot of different versions of this. And to kind of go all the way back to your idea about the nation state, it was kind of something that you can see how this weakens the lines of the nation state, right? Because one of the biggest things that any nation controls is their currency. And we can see in Greece what happens when you don't control your currency. So control of the currency is a very powerful tool for governments. Here comes a thing that is outside of their control, can be used as a currency. Does it immediately threaten the nation state? No, I don't think it does. But does it threaten, not threaten, but does it kind of smudge the lines of what the nation state is? I think it does smudge the lines. And the longer it goes on, I think the messier those lines get. And that's part of you can see that's part of the whole wave of technology. That is social media, that is networks that allow people to connect over continents and oceans. You are really seeing technology take what used to be very well-defined lines on a map and really kind of putting a thumb on them and messing them up. And I think you are going to continue to see that, and digital currencies are going to be one part of that.
Right, just a quick... Yeah,
oh, sorry. Just to add one other thing to what Paul said, I think it's good to remember historically, when Alexander Hamilton introduced the federal dollar, right? It didn't go over very well, and it also stumbled and tripped its way into massive adoption. And so, here's Bitcoin, and you have hundreds of alternative currencies, and in the future there may be bank-issued digital currencies or government-issued digital currencies. The key to the success of any one of those models is going to be adoption. Because if only 10 people are using your digital currency, you're not going to get very far, right?
Right. It's the network effect. And it should be pointed out, too, that the popularity of hard cash for illegal transactions is precisely because that is something that is stable and has a recognized value. So, and other things that are used in illegal transactions too often are, chosen because of their stability in terms of where you're doing something illicit. So from that perspective, the digital currency is until it's a lot more stable, maybe a less popular transaction for, speaking broadly of the whole global underground economy, that level of adoption, I suppose, too. Okay, so now let's jump ahead back to the nation state. There have been some steps towards regulation or even the banning of Bitcoin and blockchain technologies, and I will go back here to Jinyoung first. Could you give us a quick overview of kind of where things are that way? There's, for example, somewhat rather restrictive legislation in California. I've forgotten if that's actually pending or what the status is there. In New York State here, there's the bit license that's currently has been proposed. And I know that Russia has really heavily restricted digital currencies. Could you both give us a bit of an overview on where things are in terms of current legislation by these nation states on digital currencies at this time?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know Paul will have a lot to add because he is also the leading journalist on Bitcoin digital currencies.
Okay.
And he's in your backyard. So I don't know if any of you, in the webcast today, ever Googled Bitcoin before, let's say, 2012. If you did, you probably didn't find anything. Because I remember when my friend first told me about Bitcoin in 2010, and then I tried to Google it again, because that's what I do is I Google things. And it was really hard to find something unless you were part of that community already, right? It was really hard to get access to information about this new technology. Even finding Satoshi's white paper was not very easy. In 2013, when Cyprus went down and the price of Bitcoin for the first time hit over $400, that's when we saw interest from reporters, mainstream media, but also governments. And FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, issued guidance in the March of 2013, very broadly saying, if you're holding or moving Bitcoin, then you're considered a money transmitter. To which our General Counsel, Patrick Merck, immediately responded and say, wait. Do you really understand Bitcoin and how you're trying to apply this compliance rule to the technology? And thus began a conversation that resulted in the first US Senate hearings on Bitcoin in November 2013. Now, the result of those hearings were the US government very broadly at the federal level has basically said, okay, we see the risks, but we also see the potential benefits. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's let the industry innovate and we'll see really where this technology will go. They acknowledge that it was like the internet, right, when it was first introduced. Now, New York is very special because New York as a state has decided to take a more proactive role in trying to understand and regulate this industry. California has also taken a proactive stance, though widely in the community. It's Coin Center, an advocacy think tank in Washington, D.C., has been working closely with California, also with New York. But in California, they've actually achieved success in also achieving that kind of light touch regulatory environment. Whereas in New York, and I'll let Paul speak to that because he's in New York and very close to the issue. There's a bit of a more, I wouldn't say aggressive necessarily, but very proactive. And it could be because New York is viewed as the financial center of America.
Yeah, I mean, broadly speaking, you're going to see every nation, every jurisdiction, every regulator, at some point, they're going to have to grapple with this and figure out what their take on it is going to be. So you're going to see this in a lot of places. I think, interesting, we haven't talked about Englund, but keep an eye on Englund because they absolutely think they're very pro-Bitcoin. They think this is really interesting. They see it, especially in the city, they see it as a way to maintain a competitive edge in terms of being a financial hub, a global financial hub. So Englund is actually very pro-Bitcoin. That's going to be an interesting thing. California, the California bill that you referenced, I'm positive that has not been adopted yet. That's somewhere, it has been proposed. It's somewhere between being proposed and being adopted. They're still working on it. So we're going to have to see, right, Jinyoung? They're still working on that. New York, it's interesting. The bit license it's there. It has been basically, it's been passed, approved, it's put into law. It's interesting because what I think happens is you have this sort of clash between what is the tech world and the financial world. And the financial world moves slow and it puts a lot of rules on you for a reason. You are responsible for people's money. And that is a really, really, it's a pretty important thing. So if you want to handle people's money, the rules that are in place are pretty onerous. It is not easy to do, and it shouldn't be easy to do. That is clashing with what you get out in California and Silicon Valley. In the tech world is very fast, very light. They move fast. They come in. In Silicon Valley, everybody's got an idea and they go out and they talk it up and they get some money and they build the thing and it works or it doesn't. And they either make $1 billion off it or they don't and they just sell it to the next guy. Banks work very differently. So you're seeing, I think, really kind of a clash between those two things. I think it's important to have a lot of rules on somebody who wants to handle your money. Whether the bit license is perfect or not, we don't have to get into. But I think I think tech companies were a little bit surprised when they started bumping up against financial regulators who wanted to put all these rules on them, and they didn't understand why. And the reason why is because you have to be able to prove that you can handle people's money. You have to have capital put aside. You have to have rules. You have to have regulations. So you're seeing a bit of, and you saw it with the whole bit license process. That was a big clash of cultures. It's going to be hashed out. Look, if you want to handle people's money, the bottom line is you're going to have to comply with, especially if you want to do it in any legitimate way. I'll put it that way. You're going to have to comply with rules, and you're going to have to prove that you have the money that you'll be there when the lights go off. That you're not going to just disappear. Now I know some of well, let's leave it there. Let's leave it there. We'll go on to that.
Okay, all right. I want to jump back to Jinyoung and ask. This is one of those types of questions that one asks. So you've done a lot of work with law enforcement regarding the use of digital currencies in criminal activities. And so this is like one of those questions like, do you think that UFOs exist, I guess? With the Snowden revelations, Edward Snowden said that to the best of his knowledge, that strong encryption had not been broken by any kind of intelligence or law enforcement agency. So would I be right in thinking that to the best of your knowledge, this is the case, and that basically that when you are assisting law enforcement in situations involving crimes committed involving digital currencies in some way, that basically that you end up using kind of traditional law enforcement methodologies, and that you have that no one, to your knowledge, has made any kind of technical breakthrough and actually cracking the fundamental encryption algorithms that are used generally.
That's a very good question, and also a very good concern, right? Because there are some people in this space that would kind of like a backdoor to the technology.
That's why I asked. Yeah.
Yes, and some people want that, out of fear, right? Other people want that because their interests are to protect vulnerable people, which is also a very real concern. And the type of conversations that I'm having are law enforcement agencies and officials who are dealing with trying to protect children from internet crimes. And so these are very valid concerns, right? Is it a good idea to put a backdoor in the technology? That is up for debate. But what we're seeing with law enforcement is they are combining, traditional methodologies with newly acquired skill sets. And some of those skill sets include understanding how the blockchain works. Understanding, okay, if I look at the ledger, what am I seeing? What do these numbers mean? What are digital wallets? How do people acquire them? When people acquire them, how would I, as a law enforcement official, be able to connect a wallet or a transaction to an identity? Like, these are new skills that agencies have to learn and adopt. There are some companies in this space that are looking into providing software tools so that if you're trying to connect a digital wallet to a transaction, you don't have to do it manually, which can be very onerous and take a lot of time. And especially in situations of kidnapping or human trafficking, if you can't find that person in the first 48 hours, it's going to be very difficult to find that missing person, right?
So it's a tight time frame, right?
Right. And so there are some startup companies trying to build out the software to automate kind of that follow the coin strategy so as to help these law enforcement agencies who want to use that technology. So it's not, startups buddying up with government agencies, but government agencies saying, hey, we want to buy your product because it's going to help us save lives. Right.
Okay, Paul, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the idea of a backdoor makes me nervous, but I don't think you're really going to need a backdoor. I think it was very well illustrated in the case of Ross Ulbricht and the Silk Road. It's exactly what Jinyoung was talking about. They combine traditional methods with the new technology. And once they were able, and what they really was, look, once they identified him and they raided his house and they got his laptop and they got the servers, they had everything on this side of it that they needed to combine with his entire transaction history, which was held in his Bitcoin account. Once they had those two pieces, it was easy for them to show that he was running the site and to get the conviction. So I think you're going to see a lot of that, which is, you mentioned earlier, David, you were talking about, using Bitcoin for illicit purposes, for illegal purposes. I think people are going to find that it's actually not that great. It's very convenient if you want to do things online, but it's also very traceable. And once law enforcement can get any piece of your identity that they can attach to your transaction history, you're toast. So that's why cash is still king on that front.
That was really my question there. Okay. So okay, I have a couple questions. Okay, so the next question is, and I think that you both sort of answered it, but I'll go back to Jinyoung, ask her first, and then you, Paul. So would you say then that law enforcement, under your tutelage or guidance, is developing appropriate methods of threat mitigation in terms of the criminal use of digital currencies?
So if I understand the question correctly, You're asking, is law enforcement now surveying the use of digital currencies? Like, are they surveilling us?
Are they? No. Are they going?
I'm just kidding.
Okay. No. Do you think that increasingly that they are developing the right kinds of methodology to address this that are, say, not inappropriately privacy invasive for people who are not engaged in criminal activities, and that are effective in actually pursuing, real cases of criminality that involve the use of digital currencies?
So I think the reality is that, in every industry, right, you have literally the good cops and bad cops, right? In every industry, you have people who do their jobs with the highest standard of integrity and ethics, and you have people who do their jobs maybe not at a such higher standard. Law enforcement, from what we have observed so far, specifically as Paul mentioned in the Ross Albright case, or even the capturing of their own guys. Right? Bad cops within their own territories in Maryland, right? Their own undercover agents were becoming bad actors. And so in those cases, there wasn't a massive surveillance strategy. It was, hey, we see something suspicious. We're going to investigate it how we normally would. We're going to apply these, new skills that we learned. And oh, look, our own agents are trying to launder money. And you would hope, right, that those in law enforcement are the type of people that would only act if there is suspicious activity. And that has been our experience thus far.
Okay, Paul, your comment on that?
I think Jinyoung's actually much closer to that than I am on this. But yeah, it was pretty fascinating that you had the FBI guys investigating Albright started blackmailing him, because I think they probably thought Bitcoin is anonymous and I can get away with it. And so they were doing it. And much like Albright himself, they found out to their dismay that it's not anonymous and that it is traceable. And they were literally caught red-handed. So, I think it's going to end up in some ways being a tool for law enforcement to use. You hope that they don't abuse it. Given the history of everything that we know, you can only hope. So
okay.
That's it. I think that's a good reason why, and you'll see this too. You're going to see Bitcoin be combined with, say BitTorrent type technologies. You're going to see a lot of tumbling, a lot of people on the dark web trying. You're going to see an entire evolution of all these different tools that we use to mask who we are in the digital world, and tools that law enforcement uses to try to unmask us. And you're going to continue seeing that.
Oh.
Yeah, and to that point, some would say that the ledger today is actually not private enough for regular consumer use. So if you are not a very sophisticated user and you create a digital wallet and you share that public address, now someone can go on the blockchain and see how much Bitcoin you have in your wallet. That's not very secure. Or if they then can identify the wallet of someone that you sent Bitcoin to, and maybe it's a mental health professional, right, and that may put your job at risk, right? And so some would say that since the new technology is not that secure for consumers' everyday use, that's why we have startups building these privatizing platforms, and for good reason, right? And so the idea is that, the majority of the general public is not trying to molest children and kidnap women for human trafficking. Right? But for those that they need to be educated and trained and have the right tools, preferably developed by the industry, in order to connect the crime to the criminal.
Okay. All right, I'm going to take two steps here, or two directions here. We're having a great conversation, and I had some notes and an outline, and of course we've drifted around and gone off in other directions. What I want to talk about next is to get a bit of an overview. We've talked about this a little bit, about the future of blockchain technologies, and something I've read about on a few blogs that's, really we're looking at the bleeding edge here. Of course, we've discussed a little bit ways that blockchain technologies and altcoins can be used for things that go beyond currency. This is the Internet Society, so one of the things that we're, of course, interested in is Namecoin and other ways that the Internet governance system might be changed, or the DNS, by the use of blockchain technologies. So I'd like to get your impressions of that. And then I'm going to go off into another, the area that sounds a little like science fiction, but as we move forward with things like artificial intelligence and the blockchain, there's discussion of ways in which basically blockchain smart contracts and combined with AI might allow the creation of what are called digital autonomous entities, or different types of software that was very sophisticated that would act independently in cyberspace and be able to engage in transactions. Of course, we've got automated, stock trading and things like that. Now, obviously, these would be technologies that would go beyond that type of thing, even further. And so, just a quick, the two-part question is generally what cool directions could the blockchain go in, internet governance specifically, and more broadly the idea of the digital autonomous entities, and what implications do those have for internet governance and legal and law enforcement issues? Either of you can answer that one first, whatever.
You want to start, Paul?
Sure. I think it's a very interesting field. It's extremely early. I mean, if Bitcoin is early, this is even earlier. None of this has really gotten out of the thought stages yet. You've had people experimenting with it a little bit, but the idea is that Bitcoin allows you to create Bitcoin, the technology, not the currency, the technology, allows you to create a decentralized network that has this open ledger where every transaction is recorded, and anything that can be digitized can be put into a transaction, so that you can basically come up with a system, say, where you wanted to program a transaction ahead of time. You wanted to automate a transaction ahead of time. You can do that, and you can come up with complex series, I guess, of automations, such that, and one of the examples we use in our book is something Mike Hearn developed, where you have a car, an automated car, you have an autonomous car that essentially runs itself and owns itself and can be responsible for its own repairs, and it can interact with anything that it needs to. And it could basically be, the way he described it was, it could basically be like a taxi for the town, where instead of one person owning the taxi and kind of using it to maximize their profits through the fees go to maintaining the car, and the car becomes part of the community. Nobody really owns it, and the whole thing runs itself. That's one very small example of what you can do. This is, it all has a lot of potential. It all has to be built. There are a lot of very smart people thinking about it, but it's kind of one of these things where I look at Bitcoin, and Bitcoin it's almost like a quirk of history. It came along at the right time. People were open to it, and it took off. And people got very excited about it. And then they realized, to actually get it somewhere, it's going to be a lot harder than we thought it was, to get it past a small group of real true believers. These other ideas are all really great. I think they're going to take a much longer time to build out. So they're exciting, but they're a very long way, I think, from being practically implemented.
Okay, I'm going to throw that over to you, Jinyoung.
Yeah, I agree with Paul. I think, we as humans, we are very creative and imaginative. And, there are times when I look at my smartphone and I think, why can't I have this function already? Like, why can't I just do this already, right? Because it's as if our imagination is now starting to precede the technology, right? Which is good, because it gives makers something to aspire to. Some of the applications of the blockchain technology that I'm most excited about is a project that's housed with MIT Media Labs. Now, for those that are unaware, MIT Media Labs, they're based in Boston, in Massachusetts, and Gavin Andreessen and two of the other of the 5 core developers, Vladimir Vanderleen and Corey Fields, who used to be housed at the Bitcoin Foundation, are now funded through MIT Media Lab. And one of kind of the research projects that they are ramping up is the one on digital identities. And I started out in Africa, and in the first world, we take for granted the fact that people can identify us, whether it's your driver's license or, my husband's in the military, so I have a military ID card, or your passport. But there are people in countries that can't get a simple ID form. And because they don't have a way to verify their identity, they can't even get a bank account. It's very difficult for them to prove property ownership. It's very difficult for them to even get a passport to get out of the country. And so one of the projects that MIT Media Lab is pursuing is how can we maybe decentralize even the issuance of identities from governments by using the blockchain technology. Now, if you marinate on that idea, you're like, oh, that sounds like a really great idea. It'd be so much more efficient. But will it? Will people trust a system that is run by math, or will people trust a system that is run by a private corporation over a, government for the people type government, right? So these are all the questions that are being weighed at the moment.
Sure. Certainly from the civil liberties and privacy standpoint, a lot of people would be, very uncomfortable with the idea of any kind of identity that was at a global level anyway. That would, seem like dystopic science fiction. Okay, so the next question is a very broad. I'll take it in 2 parts. And I'll ask the simple question first, which is, if you were, king of the world, what direction would you take in terms of legislation or regulatory policy for digital currencies now? So, and I'll start with Paul on that one.
I think, and I'm still kind of the mind that you don't necessarily need to craft special rules for Bitcoin companies. One of the exchanges here in New York is called ItBit, and they went through the process of getting a trust charter, just like any other trust bank would. It took them a long time, like it should. It took them a lot of capital, like it should, but they went through a traditional route to get a trust charter to operate as a trust license in New York State. The only difference is they're dealing in digital currencies. Personally, I don't see why that shouldn't be feasible for any kind of company that deals in Bitcoin. If you're Bitcoin financial services, you're financial services. If you're just technology, you're just technology. It's a little more complicated than that, but in broad terms, I don't think you necessarily need to come up with an entire new regulatory regime just to deal with Bitcoin companies. I think there will be ways to figure out who fits into what. And you'll probably have to, look, laws are going to have to change. The times are changing. But I don't think you're going to have to go wholesale and just come up with a whole different world of Bitcoin rules that only exist for Bitcoin companies. I think this is going to be, again, this is one of these processes that's going to play out over the next 5, 10, 20 years that we're talking about. But I think in the end, what you will end up with is probably an expansion of the laws to sort of include these different buckets of Bitcoin companies. But they will end up pretty much operating like a traditional company. It's just that the specific product is going to be a little bit different. I think that's the way it's going to go.
Okay. So excuse my sexism. Jinyoung will say, if you were queen of the world, then how would you proceed in terms of legislation and regulatory policy there?
Well, see, now being queen is different than being president, right?
Sure.
Or being like Congress.
No.
Executive order.
Yes, right. That's right.
I would hope, right, that we live in a society where while we may have different positions on ideology, that we can at least agree on a common goal. And in the case of digital currencies, what if our shared goal was to allow this new technology to innovate, to allow it to advance in a way as to include previously unbanked people into the global economy, to develop in such a way that it provides more security, more transparency, more efficiency, more affordability by people who may not be from affluent first world nations. But at the same time, protecting the most vulnerable, right? Because there are some people that are unable to protect themselves. And so, as Paul mentioned, what if we didn't treat digital currencies separately just because it was technology and math based, and had it incorporated into our existing structure today? And just like how checks are slowly becoming extinct with the generation in which it was introduced, over time, would credit cards become extinct with that generation, right? And then over time, as people understand the technology and as the technology itself matures, would it become freeing to most people, but still secure for the most vulnerable to use? And I feel like that's the kind of the mandate that I would set is, hey, here are your guidelines. Now, as a market and as the state, let's work together to figure out what that looks like.
Okay, great. Now I'm going to ask what I think of as the hard question. This is the Internet Society question here. The Internet Society was formed initially to promote the open development of new technology. And in the difference between, we were talking about law enforcement before, that law enforcement in the physical world is often reactive. So to use an example, it's illegal to commit murder. If I were to kill somebody, then there would be an investigation and I would be arrested and then punished. With the technology we're talking about, as Lawrence Lessig said, Coda's law, basically, a lot of what we would think of as law enforcement or societies, as you were saying, Jinyoung, the ways that society acts to protect, people, are embedded in technology in cyberspace. So, what direction would you, and questions for Paul too, recommend in terms of promoting the open development of new technology that will promote innovation and that still at the same time will address some of these kinds of privacy and security issues that we're concerned about that do require some type of regulatory action? Okay, so you're first.
So what I think is interesting, right, about the era that we live in of technology, right, is I think that consistently I see a sense that technology is flawless, right? That, of course, we understand human error, but for some reason that, if we automate it or if we apply technology to it, then it reduces that friction and it, is flawless. And I would say, yes, it does reduce friction, but it's not always flawless, right? So you always need that human element, right? One very clear example is I can't use my PayPal account because ever since I got married, they refuse to acknowledge me because they're like, well, your social security doesn't match with your name. And I try to explain, well, I got married and, now I can't use my PayPal account because their technology will not verify me as the owner of that account. Right. And so when it comes to, as humans, we do have these issues about privacy and transparency and security. I think it's going to take a joint effort by technologists, but also, people in the regulatory, law enforcement, technology communities to really come up with the best strategies.
Okay, Paul?
Yeah.
I think, first of all, I don't think we have an innovation problem. I think that's a red herring. People say, you're stifling innovation. We're not stifling innovation. I mean, there are new things being invented every day. There are new things coming every day. I really don't think we have an innovation problem. And what I do think, and I'm about to go off on a little bit of a political rant here, what I do think is what we actually have are too many vested interests that have gotten too large that really want to hold on to their own little monopoly or their own little silo. That's where I think if you really wanted to talk about how can we change things, really level the playing field, really create a situation. And Jinyoung, are you actually in DC right now?
I am in Vegas.
Oh, you're in Vegas.
Yeah.
Well, some of you are in DC, and I think that this whole world of special interests and moneyed interests that, you throw around their weight in DC and their money in DC, I think that is the real problem. I think our political system has become stilted to a really damaging degree. I think you have two political parties that really don't have much different to offer people. And because of that, you've turned off a lot of people. I think we have a very weak democratic process because nobody really believes in the system anymore. What they believe in is the society and the world, and we all go along in our days, and you believe in the people in your town and in your state, but you don't really believe in the political system, because I don't think the political system really has much to do with us anymore. So I don't think we have an innovation problem. I think we have a politics problem. I'll leave it there.
Okay, I'll say personally, and I'm certainly not speaking for the Internet Society here, but that I would agree with your general view. And what's interesting is I think, because I was just at a New York Public, that's right, sorry, at the New York Public Service Commission hearing about Internet access in New York. And there we have some issues with the infrastructure not being built out in the right way, probably because of exactly what you're talking about as well. So the issues you're talking about affect the internet in some other ways too, and broadly in different kinds of fundamental infrastructure ways in this country. Next, okay, sorry.
Really quickly to that point. I mean, I think I feel like, when communities are much smaller, there's greater trust, right? And like Paul said, that's what we believe in. I mean, we all operate in this world, and we're, highly functioning people, and we're doing great because we have our communities. And, today I'm in Vegas, but yes, I am mostly based in DC, and I agree with Paul. I think that in a way, government is bloated and it's gotten way too big, and it's not connected, right, to people at large. And just like nations rise and fall, governments, they succeed and fail. At some point, something gets too big and it does need to be broken down again. It does need to be decentralized. And one of the great potential benefits of the blockchain technology and Bitcoin as a digital currency is that it can decentralize these really large, complex, and non-functioning systems, and in a way democratize a lot of these really stagnant systems that we have.
Yeah, just to pick up on the thread there too, the advantage of a democratic system where you have rule of law is that basically there can be a release of pressure in terms of people being dissatisfied and general breakdown before you have an explosion. Whereas, say, in a dictatorship or a very repressive governmental system, let's just say, the pressure builds until you have a really violent explosion. So basically, in a really democratic system, you can sort of overthrow the government legally if enough people are just fed up, and then they go and elect somebody different or what have you. So I guess that's the issue. What we are really hoping to have, or at least this is my personal desire, is to develop in the internet and technology governance space, and I think a lot of the Internet Society members would agree with me here, where it's like that, in that sense that before something blows up, collapses, or whatever, that there can be an open dialogue and a shift in direction by consensus. So now we have from one of our viewers a question. I'm going to, because Jolly is closer to the monitor where he can see it, I'm going to have Jolly read the question.
She's going to come on. So.
Oh, okay. We're going to have her come on. Better yet. Sure.
Hi guys,
Hi.
I'm Natalia, coming from Montenegro, ISOC Montenegro. So thank you for this opportunity. It's really great to hear something about this for me for the first time. I have read some books about Bitcoin. What is a big thing is what are the other cases that the Bitcoin and blockchain as technologies could be used for? So you mentioned something like ID issuance. I know about elections and voting, not sure about the privacy. But what could be like examples? Is there any other use cases, or is it still in theory that could be used, that Bitcoin and blockchain could be used as technologies?
I mean, there's a lot of them. Just to go briefly, this is basically a currency application, but the remittance business is a really big deal. People are talking about that. Anywhere where you can kind of lower costs for financial services, that is something that people talk about. This whole issue of the unbanked and the underbanked, where if you can have a system like Bitcoin on a mobile phone and you can give people a digital wallet, you can give them a way to sort of plug into financial services that they didn't have before. So that's a really interesting one. It's going to take a while to build out, but that's a really interesting one. To give you another example, Mike and I, my co-author, we took our book and we took a hash of the book and inserted it into a transaction and put it into the blockchain, just as an example of what you could do in terms of copyright protections. So now, if somebody wanted to come along and say that they wrote our book, we could point to this transaction, we could go into it, we could unpack the book, and we could show that we had written it and that we owned it. That's just another one. That's another idea. I think, look, if say you're an artist somewhere, where you are, you can take your work, you can put it online, and you now have a way to get paid for it directly from people. That's another one. There are just a lot, and there are a ton of them. Those are just a couple off the top of my head. Jinyoung, you probably have some others.
Yeah, I mean, just going back to what Paul said earlier, digitalizing assets, right? So his example of, what if in your town or community, instead of everyone owning a car, that you would have one or a couple of cars that everyone would have access to, you could apply the blockchain technology in that way. Another very popular idea in this space is this idea of smart contracts, right? Where currently, so for example, in the United States, if you want to buy a house, you have to have multiple people sign it. You have to have your lender. It has to go through escrow. It's very time consuming. You have to physically be present to sign these documents. And, nowadays we have a tendency to email things to each other. That's not very secure, right? So what if you could sign documents in a secure way that is not through your email, right? That could easily be hacked, and have different people from different locations around the world verify their identity for one, and then two, sign that contract. It makes things more efficient, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, how are we doing here? Jolly, do we have any other questions or from our Okay, that's it. Okay, well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I'm going to kind of wind things down now, and thank you both again. We do. I think we're going to kind of wind it down, because what I really want to do is invite you both back to some future event where we'll take it to the next level. And what I really want to do is bring people together. Today we had a conversation, but what I'm very interested in doing is taking things to the next level in terms of actually developing initiatives, policies, and actual software. So we'll be bringing in other people at a future point where we can have a dialogue that I would hope would actually lead to drafting of some type of either a document or a policy statement or something like that as the next step in our process here. I'd like to thank you both again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks
for having us.
Okay, well, it was great. Thank you.